In the dying days of the Third Age, when shadow crept ever southward from the uttermost north, there stood upon the wind-swept heights of Mount Gundabad a solitary tower. Dark was that place, and long abandoned since the fall of the Witch King's realm. Yet within its crumbling walls burned still a beacon, the last light of the northern watches. Captain Aldanor of the Dunedain gazed upon the flame with eyes gray as winter stone. 27 rangers stood with him in that accursed place, their cloaks whipping in the bitter gale that howled down from the gray mountain. They were the last of their kind in those northern reaches, keepers of an ancient vigil that none remembered save they. "The beacon failed," spoke Malthan, eldest among them, his weathered face etched with lines of countless winters. 3 days passed. It burned bright as Arundel's star. Now see how it gutters like a candle in the storm. Indeed, the mystic flame that had burned unconsumed for nigh on 1,000 years now flickered weakly, its azure light dimming with each passing hour. None knew the secret of its kindling, for that knowledge had died with Arthedain's last king. "What evil stirs that would quench the light of Fornost?" whispered Galeon, youngest of their company. His hand strayed unconsciously to the hilt of his blade. Aldanor raised his weathered hand for silence. In the dying light of the beacon, his face seemed carven from the same stone as the ancient tower. The dead king spoke of this hour in prophecy. When the last light fails, the sleeper wakes. The time of the final hunt is upon us. In the gray hour before dawn, the rangers gathered in the tower's highest chamber, where ancient runes carved in the black stone of Angmar still gleamed with faint malice. There, upon a pedestal of white marble stained with the blood of kings, lay the chronicle of the Northern Doom, a tome bound in dragon skin and sealed with the sigil of Elendel. Aldanor's voice echoed in the vaulted chamber as he read the fateful words, "In the last days of the Third Age, when hope grows dim and shadow lengthens, the sleeper of the endless north shall wake. From the halls of the Ice King he shall come, and with him the hunt of the dead. Only the rangers of the ancient line may stand against this tide, yet 7 times 7 shall fall, ere the dawn of the Fourth Age breaks." Seat, the words hung heavy in the air like a funeral shroud. 49 rangers, their entire order in the north, would perish in the coming darkness. Yet still they must ride, for such was their oath to the fallen kings of Arthedain. "Where lies this sleeper?" asked Malthan, though his voice betrayed that he already knew. "In the Forodwaith," Aldanor replied grimly, "beyond the realm of Forochel, in the uttermost north, where even the Losoth fear to tread. There, in the crown of ice that caps the world, he waits in halls carved from living glacier." Galeon shuddered. "Men say that land is death itself, where even the wind freezes and the very air burns the lungs like fire." "Aye," nodded Aldanor, "yet thither must we ride. For if the sleeper wakes fully and gathers the hunt to his banner, not Rivendell nor Lothlorien shall stand against him. The free peoples of Middle-earth shall be as leaves before the storm." At first light, the rangers descended from Mount Gundabad, their horses' breath steaming in the bitter air. The last light flickered once more and died, plunging the ancient tower into darkness for the first time in a millennium. Southward, they rode at first, through the haunted valleys where once the armies of Angmar had marched to war. Past the ruins of Carandum they went, that dread fortress where the Witch King had held court in the elder days. No birds sang in those accursed lands, and their horses trembled at shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. 7 days they journeyed thus until they came to the borders of Forochel, where dwelt the Losoth in their halls of ice. These were a strange folk, inured to the bitter cold, who had given succor to Arvedui when he fled the ruin of his kingdom. Chief Sulimo of the Losoth met them at the ice bridge that spanned the frozen bay of Forochel. His face was like carved walrus ivory, and his eyes held the wisdom of the eternal winter. "Turn back, rangers of the south," he warned, his breath forming crystals in the Arctic air. "You seek the crown of ice, but death waits in those halls. The sleeper stirs, and with him wakes something far older, and more terrible than the Witch King ever was. But Aldenor would not be swayed. We are bound by oath to the dead kings. If we perish in the attempt, let it be said, we died as rangers should, facing the darkness with blade in hand. Sulimo's weathered face softened with something like pity. Then I shall give you what aid I can, though it be little enough. Take these. He pressed into their hands crystals of blue ice that never melted, each carved with runes of power. They will grant you passage through the Whispering Waste, where the very snow speaks with the voices of the dead. Beyond Forochel stretched the Whispering Waste, a realm of eternal winter where the wind carried the voices of all who had died in that desolate place. The rangers wrapped themselves in furs and bound the ice crystals to their breasts, yet still the cold bit through their garments like daggers of glass. Their horses could go no further, and so they released the faithful beast to return to warmer lands. On foot, they pressed into the waste, following ancient paths marked only by cairns of black stone. Strange sights they saw in that accursed wilderness, forests of crystal trees that chimed in the wind like funeral bells, valleys filled with snow that glowed with its own inner light, and always the whispers, voices of elves and men, and stranger things that had perished in the First Age, when the world was young and Morgoth's shadow first fell upon the north. On the third day, they encountered the first of the Sleeper's servants. From a crevasse in the ice emerged shapes that had once been men, now transformed into creatures of living frost. Their eyes burned like blue stars, and their breath was the wind of the void between the spheres. The rangers fought with desperate valor, their blessed blades ringing against armor of ice, harder than steel. 7 of their number fell in that first battle, their blood steaming on the frozen ground, as their souls joined the eternal chorus of the waste. It has begun, whispered Malthan, binding his wounds with strips torn from his cloak. The hunt gathers, and we are still far from our goal. Yet onward they pressed, for retreat was no longer possible. Behind them, the sky grew dark with unnatural storm clouds, and the howling of wolves, if wolves they were, echoed across the waste. 7 more days they journeyed through that realm of endless winter, their numbers dwindling with each encounter. The servants of the Sleeper grew ever more numerous and terrible, wraiths of ice and shadow that seemed immune to mortal weapons, and creatures that were neither wholly dead nor fully alive. At last, they came to the Crown of Ice, a vast glacier that rose like a mountain from the heart of the waste. Its walls were smooth as glass and blue as the deep sky, carved with rune the black speech that hurt the eye to look upon. At its base yawned a great gate, sealed with ice thicker than a man's height. Only 13 rangers remained of their original company. Their faces were gaunt with hunger and exhaustion, their beards white with frost, yet still burned in their eyes the light of Numenor that no darkness could wholly quench. Before the sealed gate, they made their camp, and there Aldenor spoke the words that would seal their doom. We have come to the very threshold of our enemy. Here, we must make our choice. Break the ancient seals and face what lies within, or turn back and let darkness triumph. The choice was never truly in doubt. They were rangers, sworn to stand against the shadow whatever the cost. With picks of blessed steel, they began to chip away at the ice, each blow ringing like a funeral bell across the waste. As the seal weakened, strange lights began to dance within the glacier's depths. The wind rose to a shriek, and from the ice itself came a sound like laughter. If laughter it could be called, that sound which no living throat had ever made. With a crack like thunder, the great seal split asunder, and the gates of the Crown of Ice swung wide. From within came a blast of air so cold it froze the very tears upon their cheeks, and with it a darkness that was not mere absence of light, but something active and malevolent. Into the glacier's heart they ventured, their torch flames guttering in the unnatural cold. The passages were carved with inhuman skill, their walls smooth as mirrors and decorated with scenes of war and conquest from the elder days. Here were depicted the fall of Gondolin, the sack of the havens, and other deeds of darkness from the wars against Morgoth. Deeper they went, past chambers filled with treasures beyond counting, gold and silver and gems that gleamed with their own fell light. Yet none dared touch these hoards, for they could feel the malice that dwelt within each gleaming bauble. The very air grew thick and oppressive, and their breath came in labored gasps, as if they walked beneath leagues of black water. Strange echoes followed their footsteps, and sometimes they glimpsed movements in the mirrors of ice, shapes that were not their own reflection. At length, they came to a vast hall whose ceiling was lost in shadow. Pillars of living ice supported a roof carved with constellations that had never shone in Middle-earth's sky. Upon a dais at the hall's far end stood a throne hewn from a single block of black ice, and upon that throne sat a figure that might once have been a man. Tall he was, and fair of face, with hair like spun silver and eyes that held the light of dying stars. Upon his brow rested a crown of ice and iron, and in his hand he held a sword, whose blade was forged from winter itself. Yet, for all his seeming beauty, there was about him an aura of such malevolence that the bravest of the Rangers felt their hearts quail. This was the Ice King, the sleeper of the endless north, and he was waking from his 1,000-year slumber. The figure upon the throne stirred, and the very foundations of the glacier trembled at his movement. Slowly, like one rising from the deepest of dreams, the Ice King lifted his head and fixed his star-cold gaze upon the Ranger. When he spoke, his voice was the sound of avalanches in the high peaks, of glaciers grinding stone to powder. Long have I slept in this hall of crystal dreams. Long have I waited for the appointed hour. You are welcome, Rangers of the fading west, for you have come to witness the ending of all things. Aldenor stepped forward, his blade naked in his hand, though he knew it would avail him little. We know you, Lord of Darkness. You are that which was sealed away in the days of Gil-galad, when the last alliance broke the power of the Dark Lord. By what name shall we call you? Who comes to bring ruin to Middle-earth? A smile played about the Ice King's lips, terrible in its beauty. I am called by many names. In Angmar, they named me Sorrow of the North. The Lossoth whisper of me as the pale rider who hunts beneath the aurora. But my true name was given me in the deeps of time, when the world was young and Melkor's shadow first fell upon the ice. I am Thuringwethil reborn, she who was the herald of the darkness. The Rangers recoiled in horror, for that name was accursed among the wise. Thuringwethil, the vampire herald, servant of Sauron in the First Age, who had taken the form of a great bat with iron claws. She had perished in the fall of Angband, or so the tales said. You wonder how this can be, the Ice King continued, rising from his throne. Death is not the ending you think it, little Rangers. When Sauron fell for the second time, his essence scattered to the wind. Most was destroyed, but a fragment fled here, to the uttermost north, where it found the frozen corpse of my ancient servant. In ice and hatred I was reborn, neither wholly the herald of old, nor entirely the mortal form I inhabit. Even as the Ice King spoke, the shadows in the Great Hall began to coalesce into forms of menace. From every pillar and alcove they came, the riders of the hunt, mounted upon steeds of living shadow, whose hooves struck sparks from the crystal floor. These were the fallen of every age, warriors and kings who had died in hatred and whose spirits had been bound to the Ice King's will. At their head rode one the Rangers knew too well, Morgomir the Pale, once a captain of Arthedain who had turned to darkness in the realm's last days. My old friends, the traitor spoke, his voice like the whisper of wind through a charnel house. How fitting that you should be here at the ending. The dead kings you serve are dust and memory, yet still you cling to oaths sworn to shadows. The battle was joined with desperate fury. The Rangers fought as their ancestors had fought at Dagorlad and the Gladden Field, their blades singing the death songs of ancient kings. Yet for every rider they struck down, two more took his place. Rising from the very ice, with weapons of shadow and spite. One by one, the rangers fell. Malthan went down beneath the hooves of Morgomir's steed, his final words a curse upon all traitors. Young Galeon fought like a lion at bay, taking 3 of the hunt with him ere a shadow blade found his heart. Others followed, each death diminishing the light of the world. At last, only Aldanor remained, standing alone before the Ice King's throne. His armor was rent, his blade notched and dulled, yet still he faced the darkness with the courage of his lineage. "You have fought well, last son of Numenor," the Ice King said, almost gently. "Join me now, and I will give you dominion over the south, when the ice comes down from the north to cover all the land." "I am sworn," Aldanor replied simply, and raised his blade for one last charge. But even as Aldanor prepared to die as befitted a ranger, the Ice King raised his hand in a gesture that seemed almost protective. The Shadow Riders halted their advance, and a strange silence fell over the Crystal Hall. "Hold," commanded the Ice King, and something in his voice made Aldanor pause. "Would you know the truth ere you die, Ranger? The full truth of why you were sent here?" Aldanor's eyes narrowed. "Speak your lies, Lord of Darkness. They will not turn me from my path." The Ice King laughed, but there was no mockery in the sound, only a terrible sadness. "Look upon this." He gestured, and the ice walls of the chamber became clear as water, revealing scenes from across Middle-earth. There was Minas Tirith, its banners flying proud. There was Rivendell, serene in its hidden valley. There was the Shire, green and peaceful, all safe, all untouched by shadow or war. "Your kinsmen in the south know nothing of the Sleeper of the North," the Ice King said softly. "This tale of the Northern Doom, it is a lie, Ranger. A lie crafted by your own leaders." Aldanor's blood turned to ice in his veins. "That cannot be, can it not?" The Ice King's form shimmered. And for a moment, Aldanor saw through the illusion, saw not an ancient evil, but a figure clad in the gray of the Ranger, with eyes full of pain and purpose. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, called Strider, king of Gondor and Arnor," the figure said. "And you, my faithful captain, have been lied to by those who should have been your brothers." The revelation struck Aldanor like a thunderbolt. The hunt, the Riders of Shadow, they too began to change, revealing themselves as rangers in gray, their faces known to him from years of fellowship. But, the beacon," Aldanor stammered, "the prophecy, all falsehoods," Aragorn replied, his voice heavy with sorrow, "fabricated by Malthan and his inner circle. They sought to rid themselves of those rangers who questioned their rule, who asked too many questions about the treasures that disappeared from our ancient hordes, about the weapons sold to bandits, about the taxes levied in dead kings' name." As the last of the illusions fell away, Aldanor saw the truth laid bare. The Crystal Hall was indeed real, but it was not the throne room of an Ice King. It was a refuge built in the Elder Days, a sanctuary where the Dunedain could retreat in times of greatest peril. Aragorn had come here in secret, following rumors of corruption within the Northern Ranger. He had found Malthan and his conspirators using the ancient sanctuary as a base for their illegal dealing, selling artifacts to the highest bidder, enslaving captured orcs as workers in hidden mines, even trafficking with the forces of darkness for gold. "When they learned I was investigating," Aragorn explained, "they crafted this elaborate deception. The failing beacon was their signal to gather all the rangers they wished to eliminate. They spoke of prophecy and doom, of a glorious last stand, knowing your honor would compel you to march to certain death." The surviving Shadow Riders removed their disguises. They were rangers loyal to Aragorn, who had infiltrated Malthan's company. Many bore wounds from the very real battles they had fought, maintaining the illusion even at the cost of their own blood. "Then, Malthan and the others?" Aldanor asked, though he already knew the answer. "Are even now fleeing south with the contents of 3 treasure vaults," one of the loyal rangers reported. "They plan to vanish into Rhovanion once word came back that you and the other troublemakers had perished in the north. Aldenor sank to one knee, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the betrayal. His brothers in arms, men he had trusted with his life, had sent him and 26 good rangers to die for their greed. "Rise, my friend," Aragorn said gently. "You are not to blame for trusting where trust was warranted by years of faithful service. The fault lies with those who perverted their oaths for gain." But even as the king spoke, a new alarm sounded through the crystal halls. The true danger was not yet past. A ranger came running into the hall, his face pale with terror. "My king, they come from the deep places, things that were disturbed when Malthan's men broke into the sealed vaults." Aragorn's face went grim. In their greed, the corrupt rangers had done more than steal ancient treasures. They had broken wards that had held since the Elder Days, releasing things that should never have seen the light again. From the deeper passages came a sound like the grinding of millstone, and with it a fetid wind that spoke of cavern where no living thing had walked since the First Age. The floor trembled beneath their feet, and cracks appeared in the crystal wall. "Balkoth," whispered one of the older rangers, using an ancient word of dread. "Shadow spawn from the deep dark." These were creatures older than orcs, older than trolls. Things spawned in the pits beneath Utumno. When Melkor first delved his dungeons in the north, the corrupt rangers' greed had weakened the seals that kept them bound, and now they sought to escape into the wider world. "How many?" Aragorn demanded, his hand moving to Anduril's hilt. "Dozens, Lord, maybe more. They pour up from the deepest levels like smoke from a forge." Aldenor looked up from where he knelt, and in his eyes burned once more the light of Numenor. "Then here we make our true stand, my king, not for a lie or a prophecy, but to keep the darkness from the world." The remaining rangers, only 15 now of the original company, formed ranks in the Great Hall. Whatever came up from the depths would find them ready. "For the honor of the rangers," Aldenor cried, raising his notched blade. "For the honor of the rangers," they replied, and their voices echoed from the crystal walls like a battle hymn of the Dunedain. The battle in the crystal halls raged through the long northern night. Wave after wave of shadow spawn poured from the deep places, creatures of claw and fang and malice, things with too many eyes or none at all, beings that seemed formed from the very substance of nightmare. The rangers fought with the desperate valor of their lineage. Aragorn wielded Anduril with the skill that had broken the armies of Mordor, its flame cleaving through shadow flesh as if it were morning mist. Aldenor stood beside his king, his battered blade singing the death songs of a dozen shadow beasts. One by one the rangers fell, but each death bought time for the others. Young Galion, for he lived still, his death in the illusion having been merely seeming, held a narrow passage single-handed until his strength failed. The brothers Halbarad and Hurin died back to back, their bodies forming a barrier the spawn could not pass. As dawn broke over the crown of ice, the last of the creatures fell to Aragorn's blade. Of the 15 rangers who had made the stand, only 3 survived. The king himself, Aldenor, and a young ranger named Malbeth, who would carry their tale south. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The shadow spawn were contained, the ancient seals restored. More importantly, word would go out to every ranger company in Middle-earth, warning them of the corruption that had taken root in their order. In the Crystal Hall, now quiet save for the dripping of melting ice, Aragorn stood before the bodies of the fallen. "Let it be recorded," he said solemnly, "that here died the true rangers of the North, not in folly or deception, but in defense of the light." Feet, as they prepared to leave that place of triumph and sorrow, Aldenor paused at the chamber's threshold. "The Fourth Age begins, does it not, my king?" Aragorn nodded, his face aged by the night's trials, but his eyes bright with hope. "It does. An age where trust must be earned anew, where the old oaths must be renewed or abandoned, an age of endings and beginning." Behind them, the crown of ice began its slow collapse, the ancient sanctuary sealing itself forever. The age of the Rangers of the Endless North was over, but the age of the Rangers of the Reunited Kingdom had just begun. Epilogue: The New Covenant. The return, 7 days they journeyed south from the ruins of the Crown of Ice. 3 figures moving like gray shadows across the whispering waste. The voices of the dead still sang in the wind, but their song had changed. No longer a lament of despair, but a chorus of remembrance for those who had given their lives that darkness might not prevail. Aragorn walked with the measured pace of one who bears the weight of kingship, yet his gray cloak was rent and bloodstained, marking him as a ranger still before all other titles. Beside him, Aldenor moved with the careful gait of the wounded, his left arm bound in a sling fashioned from Galion's cloak, a reminder of the young ranger's sacrifice. Young Malbeth brought up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning their back trail, for the habit of watchfulness dies hard in those trained to guard the borders of the world. They bore with them more than the memory of their fallen brothers. In Aragorn's pack lay the chronicle of Malthan's treachery, documents and correspondence that revealed the full scope of the corruption that had infected the Northern Rangers. Names, dates, payments received, artifacts sold to merchants in Dale and Esgaroth, even correspondence with agents of the enemy who still lurked in the wild places of Middle-earth. It was a catalogue of betrayal that would shake the foundations of the ranger companies from the Grey Havens to the Sea of Rune. On the 3rd day, they encountered the Losoth returning from their winter hunting grounds. Chief Sulimo met them at the ice bridge, his weathered face grave as he counted their diminished numbers. The crystals served their purpose, he said simply, noting the blue ice stones that still hung about their necks, now cracked and clouded from the ordeal in the deep places. But the price was high, even higher than we feared. Aragorn inclined his head respectfully. Your people's wisdom preserved us, when deception would have destroyed us all. The debt of the Dunedain to the Losoth cannot be measured in gold or silver. Sulimo's expression softened slightly. The Ice Runners will carry word ahead of your coming. Already, the news spreads south. Malthan and his conspirators have been taken at the ford of Bruinen. Your cousin Faramir leads the company that holds them. The news brought grim satisfaction rather than joy. Justice would be done, but it could not restore the lives of those who had died believing they served honor when they served only another man's greed. The reckoning at Rivendell Imladris lay serene in the morning mist as the 3 survivors descended the hidden paths to Elrond's house. Yet there was a tension in the air, a sense of momentous events unfolding. In the courtyard of the last homely house, a great gathering had assembled, rangers from every company between the Misty Mountains and the Grey Havens, their weathered faces grim with the knowledge of what had transpired. At their head stood Faramir, Prince of Ithilien and Steward of Gondor, his noble features marked by the same weariness that had settled upon his cousin the king. Beside him waited Elrond himself, the ancient elf lord, whose wise eyes had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms beyond counting. In chains before them knelt Malthan and 7 of his fellow conspirators. The once proud ranger captain kept his head high even in defeat, but his companions showed the full weight of their shame. Their gray cloaks had been stripped from them, leaving them clad in the rough brown of common prisoner. As Aragorn approached, all present rose in respect, all save the chained traitors. The king's gray eyes swept over the assembly, taking in faces he had known for decades, men who had shared campfires and battle lines, who had trusted him with their lives as he had trusted them with the realm's safety. Let all here witness, Aragorn's voice carried clearly in the morning air, that the trust placed in the Rangers of the North has been grievously betrayed by some among us. But let it also be witnessed that honor yet lives in the hearts of the Dunedain, paid for with the blood of heroes. He gestured to Aldenor and Malbeth. These men, and 24 others who now sleep beneath the ice of the uttermost north, proved that the ancient courage of Numenor flows still in our veins. They faced what they believed was certain doom for the sake of duty. And when duty called them to face actual peril, they answered with their lives. Malthan finally raised his head, his eyes still defiant. You speak of honor, King of Gondor, But what honor is there in ruling from a palace while your rangers freeze in the wild places? We took what was owed to us, payment for years of thankless service, while you sat on your throne in the south. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment it seemed as if Malthan might yet sway some hearts. But Aldenor stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of one who had faced the darkness and emerged unbroken. You lie, traitor. I have seen the records of your corruption. Rangers' pay diverted to your personal accounts. Weapons sold to bandits who prey upon innocent travelers. Ancient artifacts of power traded to agents of the enemy for gold. This was not desperation, but greed, pure and simple. The murmur that ran through the assembly was like the growl of a pack sensing weakness in their prey. Whatever sympathy some might have felt for Malthan's words died in the face of Aldenor's testimony. Elrond spoke then, his ageless voice carrying the weight of millennia. In the days of Gil-galad, such treachery would have meant exile beyond the circles of the world. Yet mercy must temper justice, for in punishment lies the seed of either redemption or deeper corruption. See the new order. The trials lasted 3 days, and when they were concluded, the sentences pronounced were both just and merciful. Malthan himself would spend his remaining years in the dungeons of Minas Tirith, his knowledge of ranger operations and ancient lore too dangerous to allow him freedom, but too valuable to waste through execution. His lieutenants faced exile beyond the borders of the reunited kingdom, forbidden to bear arms or claim the protection of any lord within Aragorn's domain. But the greater work lay ahead, the rebuilding of trust within the ranger companies and the establishment of new safeguards against future corruption. On the 4th day after the trial, Aragorn convened the Council of the Grey Company in Elrond's hall. Representatives from every ranger outpost attended, their weathered faces grave as they listened to their king's word. "We have learned bitter lessons in these past weeks," Aragorn began. "The old ways, the blind trust in the wisdom of our elders, the assumption that oath-sworn men cannot fall to corruption, these have proven insufficient. We must forge new bonds of brotherhood, create new checks upon power, new ways to ensure that those who guard the borders are themselves guarded." Aldenor, his wounded arm finally freed from its sling, stood to address the assembly. His words carried the authority of one who had faced ultimate betrayal and emerged with his honor intact. "I propose we establish the Circle of Truth," he said. "A body of rangers drawn from every company, sworn not to any captain or commander, but to the ancient ideals of our order. They will have the authority to investigate any ranger of any rank who is suspected of corruption or betrayal." The proposal sparked immediate debate. Some argued it would breed suspicion and mistrust among brothers in arms. Others pointed out that such oversight was necessary to prevent future Malthans from arising. The discussion raged for hours. Rangers who had shared countless dangers now finding themselves on opposite sides of a fundamental question about the nature of their order. Finally, young Malbeth rose to speak. As the youngest ranger present and one of only 3 survivors of the Crown of Ice, his words carried special weight. "Brothers," he said, his voice steady despite his youth, "I have seen what happens when trust is betrayed. I have watched good men die because they believed in the honor of those who led them astray. But I have also seen the true courage of the Dunedain, the willingness to sacrifice everything for duty and honor." Captain Aldenor's Circle of Truth is not about mistrust. It is about ensuring that trust is never again misplaced. His words swayed the assembly. By evening, the structure of the new order had been established. The Circle of Truth would consist of 7 rangers, one elected by each of the major companies, serving terms of 3 years with no possibility of re-election. They would have the authority to audit the accounts of any ranger outpost, to investigate reports of misconduct, and to bring charges before a tribunal of their peers. More importantly, every ranger would now swear a dual oath, one to their king and kingdom, and another to their brothers in arms, promising to hold them accountable for their actions, as they themselves expected to be held accountable. The Vigil of Remembrance, A month after the trials, as spring began to touch the lands south of the Misty Mountains, a great gathering convened at the ruins of Amon Sul, the ancient weathertop, where the watchtower of Amon Sul had once stood guard over Arnor. Rangers came from across Middle-earth, from the Tower Hills in the west to the borders of Rovanion in the east, from the shores of Forochel in the north to the fields of Rohan in the south. They came to honor the 24 rangers who had died at the Crown of Ice, and to establish a memorial that would remind future generations of the price of honor. Working together, they raised a new tower on Weathertop's crown, not as high as the ancient fortress, but built from the same gray stone, its design echoing the architectural styles of Numenor. Within the tower's central chamber, they placed a great book bound in midnight blue leather, its pages inscribed with the names of all who had died in service to the Dunedain since the founding of Arnor. The 24 names from the Crown of Ice joined countless others, men who had fallen defending lonely outposts, who had died tracking orc bands through the wild, who had sacrificed their lives so that others might live in peace. But this Tower of Remembrance held more than just name. In its lower chambers, Aragorn established the Archive of the Grey Company, where the true history of the Rangers would be kept. No longer would their deeds be remembered only in song and story, passed down through generations and subject to the distortions of memory. Here would be kept the actual record, mission reports, correspondence, accounts of battles fought and victories won, testimonies of those who had witnessed both the nobility and the failures of the ranger companies. On the night before the tower's dedication, Aragorn stood alone in its highest chamber, gazing out over the lone lands toward the distant north. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the ruins of the Crown of Ice, already sealed beneath fresh falls of snow, holding the bodies of men who had died because they trusted too much and questioned too little. Aldenor joined him at the window, moving with the quiet step of a lifetime's training. The former captain had accepted appointment as the first chief archivist of the Tower of Remembrance, charged with ensuring that the true history of the Rangers would be preserved for future generations. "Do you think it will work?" Aldenor asked quietly. "This new order we've built?" Aragorn was silent for a long moment, his weathered hands resting on the windowsill. "I think," he said finally, "that we have given it the best chance we can. The rest lies with those who come after us, whether they will learn from our mistakes or repeat them." Below them, the lights of the ranger camp twinkled like stars. Hundreds of men gathered in fellowship and remembrance. From the common fires came the sound of singing, not the ancient war songs of Numenor, but newer ballads that told of the Crown of Ice and the courage of those who had died there. The oath renewed. The dedication ceremony began at dawn, with rangers from across Middle-earth gathering in a great circle around the new tower. At the center stood Aragorn, no longer clad in the simple gray of a ranger, but wearing the crown and robes of the king of the reunited kingdom. Yet over his royal garments, he wore the weather-stained cloak that had seen him through countless leagues of wilderness wandering, a reminder that beneath all titles, he remained first and always a son of the Dunedain. One by one, the rangers came forward to renew their oaths. But these were not the simple vows of loyalty that had sufficed in the past. These were complex commitments that acknowledged both the nobility of their calling and the human frailty that could lead even the best men astray. "I swear by the memory of Isildur and by the light of the even star," each ranger declared, "to guard the borders of the free people and to protect the innocent from harm. I swear to hold my brothers accountable for their actions, as I expect to be held accountable for mine. I swear that neither gold nor silver, neither threat nor promise, shall turn me from the path of honor. And should I fall short of these vows, may my name be stricken from the rolls of the Dunedain and my deeds forgotten by future generations." When the last oath had been sworn, Elrond stepped forward carrying an ancient horn, the same horn of the north that had summoned the rangers to their first muster in the days of Arvedui last king. But now it bore new inscription, runes that told the story of the Crown of Ice and the Reformation that had followed. The elf lord raised the horn to his lips and blew a long, clear note that echoed across the lone lands and beyond. It was a sound of ending and beginning, of sorrow for what had been lost, and hope for what might yet be built. As the horn's call faded, a flight of eagles appeared from the north, led by Gwahir, the Wind Lord himself. The great birds circled the tower 3 times in salute, their cries adding their voices to the ceremony's solemnity. It was a sign that even the free peoples of the air acknowledged the importance of this moment, the seeds of tomorrow. In the months that followed the dedication, the effects of the Reformation rippled outward across Middle-earth. The new safeguards and oversight mechanisms proved their worth almost immediately. In Dale, a ranger captain was discovered selling information about merchant caravans to bandit groups. He was arrested and tried before his corruption could spread. Near the Grey Haven, an investigation revealed that supplies meant for ranger outposts were being diverted to black market traders. The responsible parties were removed from their positions and the stolen goods recovered. But perhaps more importantly, the culture of the Rangers began to change. No longer did junior Rangers accept orders without question or assume that their superiors were beyond reproach. A new generation arose that valued both loyalty and accountability. Men and women who understood that true honor lay not in blind obedience, but in the courage to speak truth even when it was unwelcome. Malbeth, now appointed as a roving inspector for the Circle of Truth, traveled from outpost to outpost, his youthful appearance belying the hard wisdom he had gained at the Crown of Ice. Wherever he went, he carried the story of those who had died there, not as a tale of martyrdom, but as a reminder that good men could be deceived if they did not remain vigilant. The Chronicle of the Northern Doom, once thought to be an ancient prophecy, was revealed as Malthan's masterwork of deception, a brilliant forgery that had combined genuine historical fragment with newly crafted passages designed to lure his enemies to their deaths. Scholars would study it for generations to come, both as an example of historical falsification and as a warning about the dangers of accepting ancient authorities without question. The price of wisdom. Yet the Reformation came at a cost that went beyond the lives lost at the Crown of Ice. The easy camaraderie that had once existed among the Rangers was forever changed. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, but never fully restored to its original innocence. Where Rangers had once shared their thoughts freely around the evening fire, now there was a careful reserve, a watchfulness that had not existed before. Some of the older Rangers, men who had served faithfully for decades under the old system, found themselves struggling to adapt to the new way. They resigned their commission and settled into quiet retirement in villages throughout the north. Their service honored, but their time of usefulness clearly passed. Others embraced the changes with enthusiasm, seeing in them an opportunity to build something better and stronger than what had come before. These men became the backbone of the reformed Ranger companies, their dedication to the new ideals inspiring a generation of recruits who had never known the old, corrupted system. Aragorn himself bore perhaps the heaviest burden of all. As king, he could have simply commanded obedience to the new system, but he chose instead to lead by example, submitting his own actions to scrutiny by the Circle of Truth, allowing his decisions to be questioned and his methods examined. It was a radical departure from the traditional model of kingship, one that some of his courtiers in Minas Tirith viewed with alarm. A king who allows himself to be questioned, warned one elderly advisor, invites rebellion and chaos. But Aragorn's response became legendary among the Dunedain. A king who fears questions rules only through fear, and such rule cannot endure. Better to face uncomfortable truths than comfortable lies. The memorial complete. 5 years after the events at the Crown of Ice, the Tower of Remembrance stood complete in all its detail. The archive had grown to encompass not just the records of the Rangers, but a comprehensive collection of documents relating to the history of Arnor and Gondor. Scholars came from across Middle-earth to study in its halls, making it a center of learning that rivaled the libraries of Minas Tirith and Rivendell. On the anniversary of the dedication, Aragorn returned to Weathertop for the first formal reading of names from the Book of the Fallen. It had become a tradition that would continue for centuries, a yearly reminder of the cost of freedom and the price of honor. As the sun set over the lone lands, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the king stood before the assembled rangers and began to read. Name after name echoed across the hillside, each one representing a life given in service to the greater good. When he came to the 24 names from the Crown of Ice, his voice never wavered, but those who knew him well could see the pain that flickered briefly across his weathered features. Malthan, son of Malvorn, he read at last, and the assembled rangers stirred uneasily. The traitor's name had been added to the book, not in honor, but as a warning, a reminder that even those who served faithfully for years could fall to corruption if they lost sight of their true purpose. After the ceremony, as the rangers dispersed to their camps and duties, Aldenor approached his king with a question that had been troubling him for years. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. All the changes, all the oversight, all the suspicion that now shadows our brotherhood? Did we gain more than we lost? Aragorn looked up at the Tower of Remembrance, its stones gleaming pale in the starlight. Ask me in 100 years, he said finally, when a generation has grown up that never knew the old corruption, when the new ways have become simply the way things are done. Perhaps then we will know if the price was worth paying. But even as he spoke, both men knew that the question would never have a simple answer. The reformation of the Rangers had been necessary, but necessity does not make the medicine any less bitter. The final watch. 20 years later, on a cold autumn morning, Aldenor stood once more at the window of the Tower of Remembrance's highest chamber. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined by decades of service and sorrow. As chief archivist, he had become the keeper of the Rangers' memory, the guardian of their accumulated wisdom and accumulated mistakes. Below him, a new class of Ranger recruits was drilling in the courtyard, their movements crisp and coordinated. These were young men and women who had never known the old system, who had grown up with the circle of truth and the dual oath as natural parts of their world. They questioned orders as a matter of course, investigated irregularities without hesitation, and held themselves and their comrades to standards that would have seemed impossibly high to the Rangers of Malthan's generation. They were, Aldenor reflected, exactly what he and Aragorn had hoped to create. A knock at the chamber door interrupted his reverie. "Enter!" he called, and was surprised to see King Elessar himself, though the years had been kinder to the Royal Ranger than to his former captain. "Still brooding about the past?" Aragorn asked with a gentle smile, joining his old friend at the window. "Contemplating the future, actually," Aldenor replied. "These young ones give me hope. They have a clarity of purpose that we never quite achieve, a certainty about right and wrong that comes from growing up in a reformed world." Aragorn nodded, watching the recruits go through their exercises. "The Circle of Truth reported to me yesterday," he said. "No significant corruption discovered in any ranger company for the third consecutive year. The new systems are working. And the cost? Still being paid," the king admitted. "There are fewer rangers than there once were. Some find the oversight too restrictive, the accountability too demanding, but those who remain," he gestured toward the courtyard, "they are worth 10 of the old breed." As they watched, one of the young rangers made a mistake in the drill sequence. Instead of trying to hide it or make excuses, she immediately called attention to her error and asked for correction. It was a small thing, but it embodied everything the Reformation had sought to achieve. A culture where admitting fault was seen as strength rather than weakness, where learning from mistakes was valued above maintaining appearances. "They will face their own test," Aldenor observed. "New forms of corruption, new temptations we cannot imagine. The struggle between honor and expedience never ends." "No," Aragorn agreed. "But we have given them better tools to fight that struggle, and they will give even better tools to those who come after them. That is how progress is made, not in great leaps, but in small steps, each generation building on the wisdom of the last." The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the lone land. Somewhere to the north, beyond the horizon, the ruins of the Crown of Ice lay buried beneath their eternal shroud of snow. The men who had died there were 20 years in their graves, but their sacrifice continued to shape the world they had died to protect. As the last light faded from the western sky, Aragorn and Aldenor descended from the tower, their conversation turning to practical matters, supply schedules, patrol routes, the thousand mundane details that kept the borders safe. They were older now, wearier, marked by the weight of leadership and the burden of memory. But they were also wiser, tempered by failure, and strengthened by the knowledge that even good men could fall if they ceased to question themselves and each other. The Rangers of the Endless North were no more. Their tale ended in ice and betrayal and sacrifice. But the Rangers of the reunited kingdom marched on, carrying forward the lessons learned in blood and sorrow, guardians still of the peace their predecessors had died to preserve. In the Tower of Remembrance, the Book of the Fallen lay open to receive new name, its pages a testament to the eternal price of freedom. And in the hearts of those who served, the memory of the Crown of Ice burned like a beacon, not of despair, but of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, honor could triumph over corruption, truth over lies, and light over the shadow that would always seek to cover the world. The Fourth Age had indeed begun, and with it, a new chapter in the endless story of those who guard the borders between civilization and chaos, between hope and despair, between the light and the darkness that can never be entirely banished from the hearts of men. Thus ends the Chronicle of the Rangers of the Endless North, as recorded by Aldenor, son of Adrahil, chief archivist of the Tower of Remembrance, in the 20th year of the reign of King Elisar Telcontar. May those who read these words remember the price of vigilance, and may they never cease to guard the guardians themselves, lest corruption take root where honor should flourish.